Most world champions play moves that beginners cannot understand. Capablanca was different. His style was simple. Sometimes it seemed like he's doing nothing special and just capitalizing on his opponent's blunders. In this video, I'll show you 5 simple tips to play like him. Capablanca's playing white, Blanco's playing black. Ironically, we have the French defense, and after a little knight dance, white goes knight e5. Capablanca was known for not being willing to grind, and he's just horsing around, not knowing opening theory, goes queen to f3, and let's start somewhere here. Let's think about this for a second. How would you play here if you were white? A lot of players would probably develop a bishop one way or the other, which would be a blunder. Because in this case, black could trade on e5, continue with this double check, and snatch that central pawn with a check, getting quite a decent advantage. So here we got to the first rule of Capablanca, and not even just a rule, but more of his philosophy of the game. His idea was pretty simple. If you don't mess up, your opponent will. Sooner or later he will. And of course, it's easier said than done, don't mess up, right? What if we've been meticulously perfecting the art of making blunders for years, and we're not willing to give it up? But Capablanca says it's in fact much easier. Once your opponent played a move, don't just respond, but ask yourself what was the point? Why did black play this move? Why not anything else, right? Because black could have castled, developed something, but he instead played that pawn move. What was the idea? And then you realize that the idea is probably to bring the queen out with this check. So just asking you this question, what was the point of his move, basically secures you from this blunder, and in order to stop that, he played c3 himself. Black castles, white develops his bishop, and then the other one. By the way, there are also these other little things that Capablanca formulated for himself, such as knights love outposts, meaning advanced protected positions. Bishops love open diagonals, and you see he's just following those little tips that he formulated for himself, and then he just keeps replicating them. At this point, black started getting worried, perhaps about this pressure, that white is putting onto black, and black retreated the knight back, offering an exchange of bishops, probably hoping to simplify matters, but Capablanca continued with the counter-strike, because offense is the best defense. White is giving up the bishop because he's threatening checkmate right here, and black needs to do something about that. In the game, he played pawn f5 because otherwise it feels dangerous. Like if h6 is played, white can even sack the bishop and go for the direct checkmating attack. That doesn't look good. g6 also would weaken all these squares, and white can go inside and start attacking. So black preferred instead f5, locking the position, and now indeed black's king is safe, but there is another positional drawback. Now with the pawn on f5, this knight on e5 becomes really eternal. The pawn cannot go back and possibly chase it away. Therefore, the knight has secured this excellent position. Then white castled, and black played rook to f6, perhaps to solidify this pawn, or maybe to go here and attack the queen. Now, here's another very important and instructive moment which many players struggle with. In an opening, you need to complete your development. That's more or less clear. What are you going to do then? Because in the beginning of the middle game, there are so many things that you can possibly play. So which one is the most important? And that is the moment where you need to define those priorities for yourself. And Capablanca had his priorities straight. First, ladies, second, chess, and third, the rest, working for the Cuban Ministry of Foreign Affairs when he had time and whatnot. Back to chess, with being more serious. In chess, the most important factor is activity of your pieces, and therefore he had this rule: use all your pieces. And it's key to use all of them. So you've got these few pieces on the board, and your goal is to use all of them actively. Therefore, you look at the pieces you have and ask yourself which ones are doing nothing currently. And we've got a knight and bishop, which are pretty active, queen were advanced, but clearly we've got 2 rooks, which are doing nothing. Therefore, he just activated 1 rook and then doubled rooks along the e-file, because rooks love open files, and so Capablanca is taking his rooks here, also putting pressure to this weakness, and black is also doing his best to guard it. This brings us to the next tip from Capablanca. Once all your pieces are active, it's time to go forward and attack. He played c4, getting ready to push one of these pawns forward, because literally you wish to go forward to a important side of the board and start putting pressure, start creating threats. And again, once you have these guidelines inside of your head, it's very easy then to plan and understand exactly what to do at different stages of the game. Black played knight f7, offering to trade knights. Would you take there or not? To take is a mistake. As far as I know, that motto has been adopted by a number of chess clubs and rehab centers, and it's true. Alright, if white does not want to trade knights, then what do you do? This brings us back to the previous point, go forward and attack. The way to go about this could be to play pawn d5, breaking open the center, trying to capitalize on this pressure, but of course the question is, should we play this move, or would that be a blunder? Which brings us to the next idea, and I love to use that real-life analogy, kind of like that rule, look left, look right, then cross. Of course, if you're in England, it's obviously the opposite, look right, look left, and don't cross. But the idea is that it's important to make that a little check before making a move, right? Because grandmasters like myself are often asked, how many moves ahead can you calculate, Igor? And I'm like, theoretically many, but in reality, there is no need. And Capablanca is saying, just calculate 2 moves ahead. Because here's the problem. From the outside, chess players are expected to think, but we don't. That's the problem. And Capablanca says it's fine, but at least calculate 2 moves ahead. There's no need to overcomplicate matters. But calculating 2 moves ahead already puts you ahead of the crowd. All right, so let's think about this d5 move. Feels complicated at first, but is it fine for white to play this or not? If black captures here, we've got rooks, we're going to recapture, that's all right. If black captures by this pawn, we're going to recapture, that is also fine. If black captures that way, that is probably the most challenging thing, because now we're down a pawn, and plus they're also attacking our knight. What are we going to do about that? So that's something we need to think about and figure out whether we lose this knight at all, or whether there is any good continuation. But if you think about this, you will figure out that there is a move knight takes d7, which opens up this attack, and we're actually winning some material. Our rook luckily is guarded, and otherwise we're going to capture something along the e-file, we're winning the game, which means that d5 was perfectly fine for white to play. In the game, black figured it out and instead traded knights. Now white can advance the rook, and white is keep putting pressure. Black played here pawn g6. Actually, it is to solidify this pawn, because ironically, if black played any other move, let's say, whatever, white's got this bishop takes f5, fantastic move, taking advantage of the pin and winning this pawn. If black captures, we can even sack the queen, capitalizing on the very same pin, and at the end of the day, white mouse slips and resigns. Anyway, let's go back. In the actual game, black played g6 to solidify this pawn, and now there's the next question, what should white play here? You see, all the rules that we discussed so far will apply to this position or to any other game that you play. First off, should we take here or here? Most players would, but to take is a mistake. Usually that only helps your opponent to activate his pieces, therefore we don't take. But what do we do then? Well, we've got that Capablanca's rule, use all your pieces. Think about the pieces you have and be sure that you use all of them. Right now we've got 2 rooks, extremely active, putting pressure, bishop is somewhat putting pressure, we've got queen doing nothing. And Capablanca played queen h4 to add even more pressure into this direction. Now black is quite overwhelmed, but after king g7, actually black is still holding. White is putting strong pressure, but black is more or less fine. Queen d4, Capablanca slides the queen to the middle of the board, this time taking aim at the king. Black is trying to kick the queen back, but the queen maintains this great position, and after b6, finally Capablanca snatches this pawn on e6. By the way, you may be wondering, Igor, you've just said to take is a mistake. What the heck is wrong with this move? Well, the idea is now it's not just an exchange. White actually wins the pawn, because the problem for black is they cannot recapture. Capablanca has his queen right here in an ambush, and after the recapture, that would open up this deadly discovered check, and black is absolutely done. Which means that the problem for black is they cannot recapture. They have to go back, and then white just grabs a really juicy and advanced pawn, and now has got a winning position. That said, it's still not easy to win the game, because what do? Yes, this extra pawn is very advanced, very strong, but how do you make progress? And Capablanca used his final favorite idea, principle of the least active piece, meaning look at every piece that you have and ask yourself which one is doing nothing, and then improve its position. In this position, we've got 2 very active rooks supporting this advanced pawn. The queen is taking aim at the king, putting pressure down this diagonal, but we've got this bishop, which became pretty dull. It can't go here because of his own pawn, can't go there because of black's pawn, and this pawn chain is really solid. Therefore, the bishop became totally dull, and Capablanca played a very interesting and counterintuitive move, bishop e2. Giving up his beautiful extra advanced passed pawn, aiming just to relocate his dull bishop into a much better position. He wants, ideally, to relocate it somewhere here, where it will be centralized and absolutely monstrous. Moreover, he's even willing to give up his extra pawn, but to complete this transfer of the bishop, and now black is totally pinned. But again, somehow black manages to still survive and stay in the game. Queen e3, white is putting very strong pressure, rook e7, black is holding to his dear life, queen h6, Capablanca is trying to find that second weakness, and after king g8, calmly plays h4. This little pawn becomes the final nail in the coffin. Black is absolutely paralyzed, he cannot take here because the bishop is pinned. In this case, he would lose the rook. On the other hand, he cannot move any of his heavy pieces away because that would drop the bishop, which means that he just cannot do anything. And he played a6. Again, he's got nothing to do. h5, Capablanca keeps attacking, but black thinks, okay, this pawn is already guarded, right? So he still pushes the pawn forward, maybe seeking some little bit of a counterplay. And after the trade, Capablanca played the final move that finished the game, and actually let this be our puzzle of the day. If you can't find the winning shot for white here, please write it down in comments below. A lot of you guys have asked me in comments to play games and to show exactly how I apply these ideas in my games. Actually, I did that. I'll link it down below. I wanted to do something really helpful for you, and so I put together everything that helped my students the most into one course called Level Up Your Chess, and I indeed recorded myself playing, showing you how I do this. So if you're curious, you can check it out by clicking the link below the video, and I'm sure it's going to help you to get your chess to the next level. Talk to you soon. All the best. Bye for now.